So here's some projects that we ran this spring. We still have some more going, and some going on right now, but I'll share the ones that we've completed so far. I'll let you read the list. I'm going to go over these 7 different trials we did.
Thanks, Bill. No.
If I have enough time.
You have time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, first on supplemental feeding, big issue. What I found is, for 25 years I ran bees when it dried up here in the California foothills over the summit to Nevada to irrigated alfalfa and then to rabbit brush because it just did not do well. Once we got Varroa, it was just impossible for us to keep bees alive during the summer without moving them to better forage. And then I got tired of the driving and tried playing with supplemental feeding of protein. We found out that we can keep the bees in our environment if we augment their feeding. So last year, I left off. I ran this, started the Pollen sub trial last August. We moved locations during the trial, and I left off on this slide last year at this venue in November. We had just moved all the hives down to a lower elevation because we had we started them in August, and thinking that we'd get 5 frame nukes with ample feeding to build up to pollination size in the fall and then in the spring to go to almonds. We were disappointed by the rate we get them to build up, and we'll talk about that why. So what we did is we moved them down to a lower elevation for wintering, kind of a banana belt, up above the valley floor with the cold weather, so we can continue to feed them. One thing we found of interest then was we had colonies that had plenty of bee bread in the band around the brood, but despite the amount of bee bread, the colonies were just going nowhere. We've seen this happen for years, so I was curious about that. So I pulled some of the bee bread out, looked under the scope, and found these. Every bit of bee bread all looked like this. Now, Eric Musson may remember, when we first heard about Nosema, where is Eric? Where do you go?
I'm right here.
Oh, there you are. When we first heard about Nosema cerani, and he and I started pulling out our scopes again and looking for Nosema, and we kept saying, what the hell are these things, these fried eggs looking things? And I said, what, you haven't seen them before, Eric? And he said, no, I don't know what the heck they are. And they were a mystery. And every time I kept looking at sick colonies over the next few years, I'd often see these fried eggs. And I thought maybe we found a new parasite or something that wasn't in the books. And after enough search, I found out they're fungi, they're spores of rust fungi that grow on plants. And they trick the bees into gathering. They have this fluorescent orange color. So we see these bees coming back in the fall with these fluorescent orange, what we thought were pollen loads. And the fungus also puts out a little bit of sugar secretion, so it tricks honeybees into cross-pollinating the fungi. And the bees gather this, and so I was curious about that, so I looked up the old research, and Justin Smith out of the Tucson lab years ago had done a trial of putting cage bees into an incubator and feeding them different kinds of pollens, and one of the pollens that he fed them was rust fungi spores, and he found out that the bees are better off feeding them nothing whatsoever than feeding them rust fungi spores. They actually have a detrimental effect on the bees rather than a nutritional effect. So here's all these colonies with all this bee bread, but it's probably worse for them than none at all. So that was a very interesting finding for me. So then I wanted to try to build these bees up during the winter when it's cold. And I happened to be at a convention with Jackie, and I was saying, I need to get some sugar in there, but I don't want to feed them sugar syrup because one, it's cold, and two, I didn't want them to just plug out the brood nest and keep the queen from laying, so she suggested feeding dried bird, which we did. Thank you, Jackie, and it worked very well to stimulate the bees over the winter, and so they would eat the pollen sub patties over the winter. And then late December, the weather, it didn't rain at all, and the bees were able to fly and start gathering pollen. We started seeing all this pollen coming in, and I checked, and the bees started brooding up. And I checked that pollen, and this was alder pollen. There was somewhere in the distance, there was a creek, and the bees found all this alder pollen, and they had unbroken flight weather every day, which buggered up my experiment. But it has a distinctive 5-pored pollen grain. It was, again, now this was 100% alder pollen, and that's all that happened for the entire month of January. Because we had no rain, no other species of plant bloomed, no filiary, no nothing at all. So I go, wow, that's interesting, because I've always heard that tree pollen is poor nutrition for bees. I said, well, that's going to be a good test, see what happens with the tree pollen. And what happened is we saw the queen start laying up. This is 2 days before Christmas, and rearing brood. So we hit them with some sugar syrup to stimulate them a little bit more, because normally at Christmas time, this is green. But we got no rain, some of you may have noticed that last winter, and it was not green, and there was nothing blooming at all. So we gave them some sugar syrup there. This is one of the negative control groups. So this is one of the group of 18 that got no supplemental protein whatsoever. The only thing in their diet that they had was either that old rust forth, which is worse than nothing, or pure alder pollen, pure tree pollen. So you could probably answer the question, is alder pollen adequate nutrition for bees? I'm happy with that root pattern right there. And these colonies just exploded on alder pollen. This one graded this time only one and a half frames of bees. It was a tiny, tiny colony. We lost virtually no queens. We had 216 colonies in this trial. And even though a lot of them got down to as small as a half a frame of bees, we had almost no queen loss. And even those tiny little ones that were too small to go to almonds, we were able to sell them as nukes. They were great. They just rebounded incredibly. We finally graded just as almonds came into bloom, before there was any influence of the almond pollen as far as the nutritional supplement, and graded them all for strength. Many of them by that time had built up to 10, or if you count the number of bees that are inside the rims, 11 frames of bees in those sickles. So a lot of them built up quite well. The summary of the data is right here. To validate a trial like this, you need to run a negative control and a positive control. Negative with no feeding, and a positive, what we used was natural pollen that we sent off to Stuart at Man Lake. Had him make it up into patties in the same machines some of the other patties were made up in, and fed this natural pollen and sugar syrup. And what we wanted to do to validate the experiment, the negative control group, which is black, should have been the worst, and the positive control group, which was the orange, should have been the best. And all the pollen cells we tested fell right in the middle. So that, to me, that validated the design of the trial. If that hadn't been the case, I would have just thrown the whole thing out and had a bunch of wasted time. What's interesting to me, and what we found out, is none of these were statistically significantly different from one another. We'll go over that in a minute. But very statistically different from the unfed group. So this showed there was a huge positive effect to feeding pollen cells. The other thing you can see is all the colonies went downhill from August to the middle of winter. And then they all went up. And if you look at the slopes of their growth up, there did not seem to be any effect of supplemental feeding whatsoever after the alder pollen started coming in. There was no benefit. The rate of slope tells you how much benefit there was, and all these slopes are almost identical there. Of interest is these two slopes right here. This is the two of the Man Lake products there. And look at those when we first started. One of them, this Ultra-Bee, just took off like gangbusters. It was a high protein patty, and the bees just jumped in that protein, and they just took off. And the same thing with their bulk patty. Apparently the bees can respond to protein very quickly. But this, going back over Elton Herbert's old research, what he found was bees can steal from their bodies missing nutrients, and they can do that for 2 brood cycles. The holy grail in an artificial diet is to get bees to be able to go for 3 brood cycles on an artificial diet. As far as I know, nobody's ever done that yet, and lo and behold, boom, you go about 2 brood cycles, and then look at that. They take off like gangbusters. They apparently, I'm guessing here, ran out of whatever the limiting nutrient was, and then they dropped down and then came back up. So the diets are really good, but you cannot sustain that rate of growth of those colonies on that diet until you find the missing nutrient. I have a trial running right now that's in progress to see if we can figure out what that missing nutrient is. Second thing then, as I said, the results were highly significantly different. This is the distribution of the strengths of the colonies for each of the different groups at the end of the trial. And then I took the mean, the average for all colonies in the trial. That's the red line in the middle, okay, of the mean strength. What's interesting is in the natural pollen-treated group, every single colony was either at the mean or above. And the negative controls, every single one was either at the mean or below. Not a single negative control was above the average, and not a single of the natural was below the average. So that's what gives you this incredible, unlike just getting stuck with that bad queens, we got really good groups to compare to right here. So then I looked at the data again, going back from January here, how much they recovered from their low, and the negative, this is, I'm sorry, how much they dropped in strength. And what you can see, the negative control group dropped by 2.5 frames average. The naturals dropped, the average was a little bit, but there was a number of these that had actually gained strength way up there. A lot of the naturals did very, very well. And then this is the statistical significance differences between them, with a total difference between the natural and all of these down here. All the pollen subs all being at B significance, so we couldn't say, and the problem is just we didn't have enough colonies. If we would have had 48 colonies each group, but there's not enough of us to do that. We probably would have I think we would have teased out a statistically significant difference on these two top tier patties right here, which was really, really good for me because the two major manufacturers, I really didn't want to piss off either of them. So, so I kind of lucked out on that one. The other thing of interest, direct interest to beekeepers is, I don't get funded that much, okay? So I make my living, I was counting on taking these colonies to almonds. So we got a contract for 6 frame colonies. And they were growing so fast that on this grading date on February 12th, anybody who had made 4 frames on February 12th would have been included in a 6 frame average easily. They were increasing very quick. So I did an arbitrary 4 frame cutoff on February 12th. And of the natural pollen group, out of the 95% of those fed natural pollen made grade. Of the negative control that were not fed supplement, 0. Not a single one made grade. And when I figured the math on what it cost me to feed, it was cost effective. As many of us have found out, it's cost effective to feed pollen sub, and then you can draw your own conclusions on which ones you think are cost effective. One thing that's interesting, you think, well, this one, the soy yeast, you ought to use B-Pro as the soy yeast formulation. Well, sure, maybe you could just feed a little bit more and make a difference. Make up for it? Well, no, because these are all fed ad libitum. As much as they eat, they would not eat anymore. So you can't make up the difference by feeding a lower quality pollen sub in greater quantity, because these were all fed. We started off feeding them all equally and then realized that was dumb. Because we actually held back the natural group because we waited for the top tier subs to catch up before it gave them any more. So they actually went hungry for, throughout the trial, often they would go hungry waiting for the rest to catch up. So we finally, about halfway through, just shifted to ad libitum feeding to feed them all that they would eat. But that left me with 2 nagging questions. Question number 1, it didn't look like there was any benefit to feeding pollen sub when there was a natural pollen flow on, okay? And number 2, why the hell didn't they grow in the fall? Well, the thing nagged us. We used amatraz strips in order to knock back the mite levels. I had first time I ever used amatraz, and it's just in this trial. So they started growing the same week we pulled the strips out. And I said, no, that couldn't be, but it bugged me all winter long. Could it have been the amatraz slowing down the growth? So we ran 2 more trials this spring to answer those questions. First one was, is there any benefit of feeding pollen sub when there is a pollen flow on, natural pollen? So we set up, I think 48 colonies. And Jeff, this is working really well for us to do this for trials. You take a single and you make up nukes of 5 frames, and you only put in 5 frames. And then as you're equalizing by shaking bees to them or moving things around, you can just walk by with the lids off, and if they got solid bees on the outside frame of both sides, they're all equal. By not putting any extra frames, you can start off with colonies all exactly the same strength, and we count how many frames of brood we put in them. And so we start off with colonies that are extremely equal in size. We moved them to a yard just as the blackberries were coming into bloom, which is our main pollen and nectar flow. And then the next thing, Jeff would criticize me for it. And scientists love to pick out flaws in each other's research. That's what we live for, okay? So this is good-natured between us. He could say, well, the difference is, Randy, there's sugar, 50% sugar in those pollen patties. You have to account for that. So yes, I did. So I calculated how much sugar was in those pollen patties, and then we mixed driver and high fructose corn syrup together to make fondant patties that contained exactly the same amount of sugar and used the same kind of wax paper as our sham patties to equalize for the sugar content. So we put colonies in pairs. We flipped a coin. One of them got a pollen patty. One of them got a sugar patty. Now, to our surprise, despite there being a really good nectar flow on, those guys took that sugar out of those patties just like in a couple of days. Man, did they just take that sugar out of those patties. They're drowning in nectar, but man, did they like to eat that sugar. On the other hand, we could hardly get them to even touch the pollen patties at first. They eventually did eat it. And of interest was a lot of them would suck the sugar out of the pollen patty, and we'd see the dried, sucked pollen material of what normally is extremely attractive pollen patty to them laying out in front of the hive. Some colonies just suck the sugar out and discarded the protein. So then we went to validate. Of course, Jeff's next question would be, well, was it a good mixture of pollens, nutritious pollens coming in? I know blackberry from experience is nutritious, so here's your picture, Jeff, of your good mixed variety of natural pollens coming in during that trial. And then here's the end results of the colony grading at the end, and as you can see, there was no difference whatsoever. You'd be wasting your money to feed pollen stuff based upon 2 trials when there's natural pollen flow coming in. So then the question is, well, when should I feed? What metric should I use to know when to feed? And people ask me this all the time. So let the bees tell you. This is the interface right here, below the honey and above the brood. This is the most dynamic part of the hive right here. And if the beekeeper learns to read what's happening in that little inch space right there, the bees will tell you what is happening and what you need. I got a whole PowerPoint on this. Because this is the interface between the energy stores in the hive and the protein demand, which is most of the time the brood, but at times the foragers are the major protein demand. They actually feed more jelly to the foragers than they do to the brood, according to Karl Krellstein in Germany. So then there's 2 interfaces here. You've got the energy interface, because they don't eat this honey. They only eat the open cells of honey or the nectar right at this interface. And the protein interface is the bee bread right here, which is constantly being turned over. I would suggest you look at Kirk Anderson's presentation, because he's going to stand a lot of our common wisdom on its head. That I won't take away his stuff, but as far as what they do with bee bread, it's not what you thought, not what all the books say. All the books are wrong about bee bread. Kirk will give you. Are you in here, Kirk?
Yes, sir.
I'm giving Kirk a pitch right now. Don't miss Kirk's presentation. Okay. Be there, Kirk. And remember, the only bees in the colony that eat protein are the nurse bees. Okay, they're the only ones that have digestive enzymes for protein. The older bees don't digest protein at all. And the currency for protein in the hive is the jelly. The jelly is the currency. The jelly is what you want to look for. I took this picture from Rob. Where are you, Rob? There's Rob. We visited his yard here in Orange County last year. Oops. And I said, oh, looks like the bees are a little bit hungry here, Rob, because his larvae are sitting there bottom of the cells, and the nurses give them just enough jelly to stay alive. They don't die, but the first thing the nurses do when they're short on protein is they cut back on the jelly a little bit, as opposed to larvae swimming in jelly. So the first thing we look at in every bee yard, at every inspection, and my sons are back here again, the first guy out of the truck opens the hive, pulls out a brood frame, and we're all waiting to hear what he says. Is it looking wet or is it looking dry? That is how we define our beekeeping. Is the brood wet or is it dry? That tells me everything I need to know about disease, about mite management, about supplemental feeding. That's all you do. The bees will tell you what's. They're looking at the amount of jelly that they're putting around the brood. If there's one take-home message to take home, that's the one to take home right now. Okay, one question answered. Okay, next question is still that nagging question about the amatraz. And then I had a crop consultant email me, or we got a correspondence from a beekeeper who put my attention about a red flag saying, hey, you know, amatraz can be used as a synergist with other insecticides. So I started searching literature to see who had looked at the synergies with amatraz. Now, Reed had already done some. Are you here yet, Reed?
I'm here.
Okay. He can tell you more. He did already found that there's some synergies with the miticides with amatraz, but to my best of my knowledge, nobody in bees have looked at synergies between amatraz and other pesticides that you're exposed to. The only one I can find is a recent study published out of UC Davis just recently, and we're on mosquitoes. And this is the synergistic ratio right here. And we got imidacloprid, dimetropfuron here, thiamethoxam. So these are neonics here, then a couple of pyrethroids right here. Permethrin, the pyrethroid, had no synergy at all. One of the deltamethrin had some synergies, but look at the neonics. 19 times as toxic if the bees are exposed to amatraz. 19 times. Well, the margin of safety with the imidacloprid on planting dust and the amount of the nectar and pollen in the corn and soybeans is, the margin of safety is maybe like in the 2 to 4 range, not much. And if the beekeeper's putting a chemical into your hive that makes it 19 times more toxic, it just throws all those calculations that the pesticide manufacturers do out the window. We're hoping to, we just funded some research with Elena here to see if we can find out whether this is true with amatraz also. Definite red flag. I don't know if it's valid or not. Okay, back to our trial. So we set up another group of colonies, nukes the same way, and we treated this with amatraz strips to keep a constant dose of amatraz leaking into the hives. We started them. We got the mites down by using hop guard. I wanted something that did not synergize with amatraz. I looked at Reed's work, so I steered clear of octopamine affecting miticides, so I used the hop guard. There was obvious, this lid had been put on for one night, so we used to say there was a nectar flow on. Okay. And so we started off with a decent nectar flow on with these colonies that equalized mite levels. It took us a while. We had to do 3 natural treatments actually to get the mite levels down, so we could eliminate the effect of the amatraz reducing Varroa. I'm getting ahead of you here, Jeff. from the effect of any negative effects of it, which would have balanced out. And then once we got them, then we go ahead and we pop in our 5 frames of foundation. We doubled these colonies up to look for growth on them. It looked like that starting out. Oh, and also we wanted to, thank you very much for bringing this up, you should actually test queens from 2 different mother stocks, which we did. So each pair of colonies came from different mother stocks with sister queens. Each one of each pair got a treatment. Am I doing okay? Okay. And the end result was when we did our final grading 38 days later. So we're just looking at build-up to see how well they did on drawing comb and building up. And there was no statistical difference. So the amatraz was apparently not the reason why the nukes had not built up slowly in their previous trial. By the way, I'm continuing this trial. I'm going to run this one for a year. So we're going to keep in one group under almost continuous treatment with amatraz, the other one not, to see if we see. And we marked the queen. We went back and said, oh, I wish I would have marked the queens to start with. So we went back, found all the queens, marked them all. So now we're running this to see if there's a long-term effect of amatraz. Okay, Varroa. You like that picture? I had Eric pose for that one. Oh. That was cute. What's going to happen? You know, amatraz is off the market. Our tactic's off the market now, and I'm seeing signs of amatraz starting to fail across the United States, and I searched literature in the world, and in some countries it's failed completely, some countries it's down to being 50%, 30% effective. We know it's going to fail. My suggestion to you is to have a plan B. Have a plan B. If you put in one of these years and it does not kill the mites, have a plan B so you're ready to roll ahead. So one of the questions is what's the best way to sample for mites? There's ether roll, there's sticky boards, there's accelerator drop, all kinds of ways of doing it. I've tried them all, and the one that I really like is the alcohol wash, shaking the bees off of a brood frame into a tub, which also tells you immediately the average age of bees in your hive. If they all fly out very quickly, you have a bunch of old bees, which would probably be full of viruses. If they just sit there in the bottom happy, you've got a hive full of young bees, which is a healthy hive. Very quick metric of how the age structure of your bees. Then what we do is we just take the alcohol washes, we put them into half-pint mason jars, label them all, and bring them back to our fancy state-of-the-art lab for washing. We do field washing. I like the new shaker design a lot that I use, but at the lab we have a fancy piece of apparatus that will shake multiple samples at one time. You can buy this from the distributors of lab equipment right here. We actually made our own, but it works just great. And here's two lab technicians in their white coats counting the mite samples for us to collect our data. And we sample hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of mite washes, both for ourselves and for our data. There's the lab in the background. So now, Dr. Ralph Buchler from Germany had an obscure paper, and in passing, he mentioned a number of years ago that mite washes taken from the brood frames have less variability than those taken from the worker frames. I never heard anybody else mention that, so I emailed him, and he says, well, yeah, it's just one small data set, Randy. If you've got any more data, I'd sure like to see it. So we went out and collected some data. Now, taking mite samples from colonies with low mite levels doesn't help you at all. There's not enough spread. So we washed mice from 140 colonies to find some that had high enough mite levels to take meaningful data. And from those, we took multiple samples from the brood frames, so several samples off the brood frames and samples at the same time from the honey frames, so we could compare the mite washes from them. And what I did is I normalized all the mite counts so that to an average of 1, and I took the standard deviations to compare them. And when I did the statistics on this, there actually was, on this very limited small data set, less variation on the mite counts from the honey frames than there was from the brood frames. On average, the counts from the honey frames ran at 80% of the counts from the brood frames. One of the problems of mite washes is who wants to go down to the brood frame, risk shaking the queen into the alcohol and killing her, and just the hassle of going down there. Man, if you just take your mite samples from the honey frames, it's way easier. So far, my limited data set support that's okay to do, take them from the honey frames. Okay, so then HopGuard 2 came out. Got Section 18 in California. And so the next day, I'm on the phone to Man Lake. I said, let's try it. It's a much heavier, I'd seen Manhattan Nasser had presented data. He tested it before on the improved product. And it looked at the data, which they tested in the fall in Canada, really good, like 95% efficacy. I thought, wow, that's great, because this new formulation has twice the amount of HopGuard and a thicker strip, and it's supposed to span 12 days of releasing the product, which means that's a whole mite life cycle in the sealed brood. So maybe they improved it, so I was kind of disappointed with HopGuard 1. So we set up a trial, put in the HopGuard strips. These are real, and we soaked them good. We got plenty of liquid on them. And the first thing we learned is when you slide that in there, any bees that strip touches get covered by it, and those bees are toast. And the next morning, go out in front of your hives and make sure that you don't have a dead queen in front of your hive, because if you happen to hit a queen, she will not survive that strip. And usually what we got is a handful of dead bees like that each morning after putting in the strips. Then the bees, these are two sister colonies side by side, sister queens. Some colonies just chew those strips up just like mad, which would, one thing, distribute the material well through the hive, but then it shortens the time that's given the dose, whereas the sister queen didn't chew it up at all. And when they do chew it up, there's to my surprise, they hit a little plastic strip in the middle of it, so you do have some residue left inside the hive. So we went ahead and treated these hives with great expectations, did some mite washes after the first treatment, and were a bit disappointed, so we said, well, heck, let's put another set of strips in. So we loaded these hives up, added the second set of strips on top of the first, and in general, they don't chew them up. So some of these strips have been in here for, I think, 3 weeks, and some are just fresh in here, but they got exposed plenty. What we did is we calculated the strips for the one strip for 5 grams of bees. We did it to the half strip, so we got precisely on the dose and distributed them throughout the colonies to exactly the manufacturer's recommendations. So it was a 7.5 frame colony. We put in 1 1/2 strips to get the dose just right. And the results of this, our target mite level was this green dotted line down here. We started with high mite washes and half cup of bees. We're up here. We're averaging about 20 mites because we chose colonies that had high mite levels to start with. And yeah, so the mite levels went down. We checked mite washes. After 3 weeks, we go, oh, a little disappointing, so we hit them again with another strip here, and then we took another mite wash at the end here after 50 days total of treatment. And as you can see, very few colonies got down to our target level of mites. We did get reduction with most colonies. So I'm normalizing the results here now. These are the control group. Mite levels, as expected at that time of year, just kept going up. Mite levels, the first hop guard treatment, bang, dropping down pretty good. Better, killed about 50%, or brought the mite levels down about 50%. And then, despite getting, oh, I didn't put the treatment in there. So right here, there was a second treatment put right here, which did not seem to have any effect whatsoever. I thought the second treatment would do the trick for sure. We were obviously disappointed. Now, one thing that you may have noticed, there were 4 outliers up here, 4 colonies that the mice just took off on. And I pondered that for a while. I said, I wonder, what was it about those 4 colonies? So I started looking at the data, and those 4 colonies happen to be strong colonies. So I thought, man, is there an effect of strength? So I broke all the data down by colony starting strength. And here we go. So I broke them down into 15 to 18 frame, because I wanted to get a wide range of colonies. So I intentionally started the trial with colonies from weak colonies to strong colonies, all matched for mite levels. So if I had 15 framers, I matched a test and control with 15 frame, and I matched test and controls for 4 framers to equalize everything. I'm just staying right ahead of you, Jeff, all the time, because you can see him, he's just ready to leap at me here. And lo and behold, the weak colonies, the hop guard did a pretty good job. The strong colonies, those are the ones that really had the problem. Totally pulled out by colony strength. I'm guessing because the strong colonies probably had more brood relative to bees than the weaker colonies. That would be my guess, but that's just a hypothesis. Okay, so normally we split all of our colonies in the spring and clean them up for mites and start each season with fresh, clean, low mite colonies. We made enough splits this spring and had a few yards of bees left over, and that's the first time we've tried overwintering colonies without splitting them in 15 years. I have no experience whatsoever with trying to run a colony for a second year without splitting it. We don't do that. I will never do it again either. Because it's really hard running colonies too. If you're used to splitting all your colonies in the spring, it's so much easier beekeeping. So we had a bunch of colonies with sky-high mite levels during very hot weather. Now, I haven't used a synthetic miticide since the year 2000, so I'm limited to these natural treatments, to formic acid, thymol, oxalic acid, or hop guard, the ones that we're using now. But it was too hot to use a full treatment of either formic or of thymol, and there was too much brood for effective use of either hop guard or oxalic acid. So what to do? So I came up with an idea. I said, well, what if you removed all the brood? That would do it, but that would be a pain in the butt, removing brood. So I said, we'll just kill the brood. Just take a capping scratcher and we'll just scratch the brood. All the sealed brood, just kill it. So 4 treatments and a control group. Oxalic acid, we scratched all the sealed brood, and then we waited for the bees to climb back on and dribbled them all with oxalic acid. Hop guard 2, we scratched all the sealed brood, and then we put in 2 hop guard strips. For wide strips, we put in 1 strip because it's very hot. And these were stress colonies with high mite levels. With a stress colony, you can kill them with a dose of mite treatment. We repeated it after 7 days, which may have been a little too soon. And then with Apiguard, we did a half dose, 25 grams in the brood chamber, and repeated that again after 7 days, and controls no treatment, 12 colonies in each group. To our surprise, the scratching the brood was no big deal. We didn't even put on beekeeper. We just went to these colonies, took the bees off, scratched them. Took 3 to 4 minutes per colony to scratch it. 3 to 4 minutes per colony was right about the cost of a treatment, so it was right, in the ballpark of doing it. It was pretty ugly doing it. And the next morning it was pretty gruesome in front of the hives where they hauled out all the scratch brood. Not all of them did it. Some of the colonies, within 2 days, had cleaned up every little bit, and the queen was laying eggs in these cleaned out cells. I don't think, oh, some look like this after a couple of days. These would be not called non-hygienic bees. So, if you have hygienic bees, non-hygienic bees, this is like the prick test, except for on very large scale. One thing we learned is those colonies that had like mite counts up in the 50 to 70 range already had a virus epidemic going with deforming virus. This is the coup de grace. Apparently the exposing all that infected brood just took them down. So a few colonies just crashed from that. And here's the end result. Control group, mite counts went up. All 4 of those treatments, mite counts went down, but not to our target level down here. And here's the 2 treatment dates right here. And when I calculated out efficacies, only 2 were significantly different from the controls. And those were the Apigard and the Formic Apigard. Had a 60% efficacy compared to control, and Formic had a 50% efficacy compared to the control. And for our mite strategy, which all we look for is 50% efficacy, those worked. So we were happy with the both the Formic and the Apigard. Not so happy with the scratch and oxalic, which is good because I really didn't want to do the scratch again after that. So we won't do that. But it's, you know, if you don't try something, you don't know. But we still have some colonies with high mite levels. So we went, and I love vitamin cook strips, Wendy. Wherever you are, I know you're listening, there you are. I love vitamin cook strips, and they're a pain in the butt to scrape out of the hive. And, you know, I hate throwing away all the strips, you know. And going down when you have colonies, because a lot of these colonies still have stacked with honey, picking it up, putting them in, and scraping it out. So I thought, man, you know, the Formic flash, Jim Hamreen, Bob Noel came up with this years ago. Did this, and Engeldorf tested it, and got really good results with it. And I've always thought about it, never tried it. So we played around with a few different absorbent pads, modified some telescoping covers with our old Miticide quick strip rims, which a lot of us still have stacks of sitting around. Our Miticide 2 rims we still have sitting around, which we find uses for. And made these flash pads, kind of like a modified fume board. We mixed the Formic at 50%. I'm sending this off to the Bee Journal tomorrow to publish, so you can read all the details. And put them on, so first we did an acid test. We did the full 90 milliliter treatment at 90, in the high 90s on a hot day in the afternoon with the interest reducer, and put the flash lid on, and then put the other lid on for to shade it. And then what you want to do, based upon what I talked to Bill Lord back on the East Coast, he says you want to see about 100 young dead bees in front of the hive the next morning. That tells you you got the right dose. And sure enough, for most hives, that's what we got. The big hives, the 3 stories that were 30 frames of bees and honey, we saw a lot more than 100 bees, dead bees in the front. So the 90% treatment killed, with a little excessive kill of bees and some. So then we took the brood out, scraped the brood out. Here's my technicians, Eric and Ian, scraping out brood. Then you bang the frame down, knock the mites out of the frame. Then you look carefully there, and you can count how many mites are alive and how many mites are dead, both the mature mites and the immature males and the immature females. And we looked at ratio. We did not collect data on this, but what we got was in the high 70–80% kill in the worker brood, a little less of that in the grown brood, but occasionally really good. Like one count, we got 11 out of 11 mites were dead. So we were really impressed by the kill in the brood, and very impressed with the 24-hour kill on the washed bees. It just knocked the mites out. The only downside is it also killed half the queens, which is a little higher level than a lot of us are comfortable with. So we got our high range right there, okay? So, so then what we did is milliliter flashes. And 60 milliliters, we got 0 queen kill at all. We got maybe 50% kill of the mites in the brood and very little kill of the mites in the drone. So the low range, you sacrifice for saving the queens was lower. Now the other thing, we didn't use Honeybee Healthy or lemongrass oil mixed with this. So that next year, we'll try that and see if we can help to prevent the queen loss. But I took that with a grain of salt because the people selling the product were saying that's what was important. Scientists tend to take sales pitches with a grain of salt. But it could be true. Maybe others will. Have you tried? I'll talk to you. Okay, you haven't tried it. And I know, and Dennis didn't use it when he ran his trial, so I was following Dennis's lead on that. And yes, we did kill 50 of the queens, Dennis. So the results were, and it was a hard one to do on the scale here. Here's our target mite level. It knocked the snot out of the mice at 60%. Briefly, we were really happy with the immediate mite counts after 24 hours. And then they climbed up, but they didn't climb very fast. We were pretty impressed. It was good. It recovered the colonies pretty well. But not quite enough for our liking to keep it down where we wanted. So we were really wanting to get down here, so we thought, well, maybe we just go ahead and hit them again the second week, because that 60-milliliter flash didn't seem to have any effect on the queens. That was a mistake also, because they took the one treatment really well. The second one, when we walked out, there were piles of dead bees in front of some of the colonies. This was a booming colony. There's no bees left. The brood's all dead. We toasted about half of those colonies with the second treatment. I called Dennis at Miticide and asked about it, and he said, not Dennis, David. He said, oh yeah, you don't want to try it again after we ran you with a strong Formic. So don't do a flash after that quick. So summary of these right here. How many time? 7 minutes. I think I'm going to do it. Oh, and thank you. This is all beekeeping funded research. Beekeepers from all over the world and beekeeping clubs, except for one beekeeping association is notably missing from this list. Oh, how about that? With the funding research proposal committee last night saying, well, we should have more research on mite treatments and nutrition. But you're not on that. But that's okay. I'm happy to come here and speak for free. Can we put the lights on? We got room for questions? Oh, I knew it. Yeah.
You're answering all my questions. No, what was it 65% Formic, 50%?
We did 50%. I'm sorry, 50% Formic. And you know what's interesting? The reason I've never tried the Formic flash for it is after using the Miticide 2 pads and Miticide quick strips, you smell Formic. Yeah, there's no getting around it. You smell Formic sometimes. And we chill it and stuff. And we love Miticide quick strips, Wendy. We love them, okay? But if we could do something just to knock back the mites when the honey super's on, they would just go pull the lids off and just do a temporary knockback, that'd be fantastic. And I've always been leery of using liquid formic acid. So I ordered some, and the company said, well, we're going to send it to you in an unmarked container so you don't have to. And we get this jug with duct tape on it, an unmarked box, and no wrapper around it, 5 gallons of 90% formic acid, and I thought, okay. So I think it was straight from China. So anyway, we got that, and then you have to dilute it down to 50%. And what we found was, you don't even notice it, the smell, when you're handling the liquid at 50%. And I think the reason is that the little bit of surface area, when you're pouring the liquid, there's very little surface area. With the quick strips, you got that much surface area times 4 with 2 strips. There's a lot of surface area for each strip. So safety-wise, we were really happy handling it. It still could use improvement, either a drench gun or some way of handling it so the beekeeper, your crew would not have to handle liquid formic acid. And that's the beauty of the quick strips. Nobody's handling liquid formic acid. Whereas I was talking to one beekeeper a few years ago who was using liquid formic acid a lot. He said, you won't believe this, Randy. But we had, in the middle of the open warehouse floor, I had a bucket of formic acid that I mixed up in the bucket with nothing else around it. And of all places to step with my boot on into the bucket of pure formic acid. And you should see how quick you can unlace a boot and take your sock off when you've stepped into a bucket of pure formic acid. Because Murphy's Law, I mean, accidents happen. And I said, God, of all the possible accidents that could happen, you step into the bucket of formic acid. So the handle of liquid, that's what the quick strips do. They get you away from having to handle that liquid. So I'm just experimenting here. What else? Yeah?
You had a good effect from natural pollen patties.
Yeah.
What's your recipe?
It was natural pollen and sugar syrup.
Sugar syrup, 2 to 1.
No, just no. I didn't even do it. I bought natural pollen. I sent it back to Stuart at Man Lake. I said, mix it up to the same consistency. So I don't even know what the recipe was. He told me what the sugar content was, so I could calculate. So I wanted to get them all about the same sugar content, but I don't know what the actual recipe was. Oh, great. Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you very much.